Have you ever noticed that when you stop texting, stop explaining, or simply step back, she starts thinking about you more? That's not a coincidence. That's the quiet power of absence. Women are wired to attach, to reflect, and to feel the space you leave behind. And when you go quiet, her attachment grows stronger in ways words could never create. Today, I'm going to show you why pulling back isn't rejection. It's the most magnetic move you can ever make. The psychology of absence is one of the most powerful dynamics in human relationships, especially when it comes to romantic attraction and emotional attachment. Absence is not simply physical distance. It is a deliberate pause, a conscious withdrawal that triggers the mind to fill the void you leave behind. When a person is constantly present, their value becomes predictable and often taken for granted. But when you step back, even slightly, you create a tension that awakens attention and curiosity. The mind, wired to seek patterns and understand emotional gaps, begins to replay moments, analyze interactions, and focus on what is missing. This is the first layer of the psychology of absence, the understanding that scarcity breeds significance and that emotional reflection is sparked most effectively in the spaces between presence and withdrawal. Women in particular are psychologically predisposed to attach through emotional reflection and imagination, which is why your absence can create a magnetic effect without any active pursuit or manipulation. When you go quiet or deliberately step back from constant communication, the brain doesn't merely notice the change, it actively works to compensate for it. Every missed text, every unanswered call, every subtle delay in response is subconsciously interpreted as a signal that prompts deeper consideration. Her mind starts constructing scenarios, thinking about what you might be doing, why you are not immediately available, and what your absence might mean about her importance to you. This mental exercise isn't just curiosity, it's the human instinct to evaluate and prioritize relationships. When something or someone becomes less accessible, it naturally increases perceived value because attachment is not purely about proximity, but about emotional significance and the weight of presence. This is why silence, when wielded correctly, transforms from a simple pause into a powerful tool of influence. Absence also has the effect of amplifying emotional memory. When you are present all the time, the small, meaningful moments often fade into background noise. A shared laugh, a tender glance, a casual conversation may go unnoticed when there is constant access. But distance magnifies these memories, forcing the brain to spotlight the moments that once seemed ordinary. Emotional significance grows in proportion to scarcity, and every past interaction gains a weight that can be felt more strongly in your absence. Her attachment begins to strengthen, not because of overt actions, but because absence creates a framework for reflection, longing, and internal dialogue. The psychology of absence is rooted in this amplification of emotional impact. What is temporarily missing becomes emotionally larger than what is constantly present. Another critical aspect of absence is its connection to self-control and perceived value. People are naturally drawn to those who demonstrate stability, consistency, and emotional mastery. When you intentionally step back without creating chaos or emotional turbulence, you project confidence and security. You signal that your attention is valuable, that you are not driven by neediness, and that your presence is a choice rather than a default. This subtle demonstration of self-mastery elevates your perceived worth in her eyes, because attraction is always intertwined with respect for someone's boundaries, strength, and autonomy. Your absence becomes not just a physical or communicative pause, but a psychological cue that prompts admiration, reflection, and a deeper emotional pull. Finally, the psychology of absence works through anticipation and emotional investment. Humans are wired to seek rewards and anticipate outcomes, and when someone is suddenly less available, the mind begins to anticipate their return and reconstruct the moments they might bring. This creates a heightened state of emotional engagement where thoughts, feelings, and desires are continuously looping around the person who is absent. It is not about playing games or manipulation. It is about understanding that presence without strategy often breeds familiarity and indifference, whereas strategic absence triggers reflection, longing, and attachment that grows organically without force. Emotional dependence is not about weakness or neediness. It is about the natural human tendency to invest more in relationships that evoke reflection, longing, and curiosity. When you create moments of absence or quiet, she is subconsciously invited to fill the space with her emotions, thoughts, and memories. This process strengthens her attachment because it activates the part of her mind that seeks connection, understanding, and reassurance, even in the absence of constant communication. The more she experiences your deliberate, quiet, or selective presence, the more she begins to lean into her own feelings, replaying conversations, analyzing interactions, and imagining what it would mean to have your attention fully. Emotional dependence grows not through force, but through subtle psychological cues that trigger her to invest emotionally without even realizing it. Every moment of silence becomes a canvas for her mind to paint scenarios that revolve around you, her imagination making you larger than life, and her attachment deepening in proportion to the space you leave behind. When a woman senses a man who is grounded, self-assured, and not excessively available, her mind starts working overtime to understand him, to anticipate him, and to feel his absence as a tangible presence. This is the foundation of emotional dependence strengthening. She begins to unconsciously measure her own feelings, desires, and reactions in relation to you. She starts craving validation, connection, and emotional intimacy, not because you demand it, but because your controlled absence encourages her to become more introspective about what you mean to her. Every small interaction you allow, every moment of attention you provide after a period of quiet, is magnified in her emotional perception, creating a sense of value and importance that words alone could never generate. Emotional dependence is nurtured in the subtle interplay between presence and absence, where she is mentally and emotionally drawn to you even when you are not actively engaging. This process is intensified by the human need for emotional continuity and attachment. When someone begins to feel your absence, their mind fills the void with the significance of your relationship, projecting importance onto memories, conversations, and even imagined scenarios that involve you. She starts creating narratives about your importance in her life, envisioning moments of connection, longing for your attention, and prioritizing thoughts about you in her emotional landscape. This is not manipulation. This is a natural consequence of strategic quiet and emotional consistency. By not overwhelming her with constant presence or reassurance, you allow her to engage with her own feelings, to confront the depth of her attachment, and to create an emotional investment that grows stronger. With every passing day, she experiences your controlled distance. Furthermore, emotional dependence strengthens because it engages her desire to be noticed, understood, and appreciated. When your attention becomes deliberate rather than automatic, she begins to value every word, every gesture, and every moment you choose to share. Her mind begins to track patterns, measure intentions, and anticipate your behavior, which intensifies her emotional engagement. She starts to feel that the connection is worth thinking about, worth caring for, and worth longing for because it is not taken for granted. This deepening attachment is a psychological response to perceived value and emotional scarcity, and it works because it activates her desire to emotionally invest in something meaningful rather than fleeting or predictable. Emotional dependence, in this sense, is the natural outcome of balance, the balance between presence and absence, attention and quiet, availability and restraint. Finally, emotional dependence strengthens when she begins to feel that her own feelings are amplified in your presence and absence. Every thought of you, every recollection of shared moments, every anticipation of your return becomes heightened in intensity. She invests emotionally because she senses that her attachment matters, that her feelings are being mirrored, and that the space you occupy in her mind and heart is unique. Your deliberate quiet, combined with selective engagement, creates a framework where her emotional energy naturally flows toward you, consolidating attachment, desire, and longing without you needing to chase, explain, or prove anything. The power of mystery in relationships is one of the most subtle yet profound tools for deepening attraction and emotional attachment. Mystery is not about playing games or being deceptive. It is about cultivating an aura of depth and complexity that naturally draws others in. When a man reveals everything about himself too quickly or becomes constantly available, predictability replaces intrigue and emotional engagement diminishes. Mystery, on the other hand, keeps the mind curious, the emotions alert, and the attachment active. Women are especially attuned to this dynamic because they are wired to analyze, reflect, and seek emotional depth. When a man maintains a certain level of unpredictability in his behavior, whether through measured communication, selective presence, or subtle silence, he creates a psychological space that compels her to invest more of her thoughts, emotions, and imagination into the relationship. Every pause, every unspoken word, every glance that lingers just slightly longer than expected becomes an invitation for her mind to explore, anticipate, and emotionally attach to him in ways that constant openness could never achieve. Mystery functions as a magnifier of perceived value. When a woman cannot fully predict your thoughts, your reactions, or your intentions, her mind begins to fill in the gaps. She starts constructing narratives about who you are, what you want, and what you feel, and this process of imagination strengthens her emotional attachment. The unknown becomes more powerful than the known because human brains are naturally drawn to puzzles and enigmas. Every unexplained smile, every moment of quiet confidence, every subtle gesture becomes significant in her perception, prompting her to analyze meaning, anticipate outcomes, and emotionally invest without conscious awareness. This is why men who cultivate mystery often become unforgettable. It is not through overt effort, but through the subtle art of withholding, pacing, and allowing the other person to engage mentally and emotionally in ways that go beyond simple presence. The power of mystery also signals emotional mastery and strength. When you do not feel the need to overshare, over-explain, or constantly validate your presence, you project a sense of stability, self-awareness, and confidence that is inherently attractive. Mystery communicates that your attention is valuable, that your emotions are controlled, and that your identity is not defined by the approval of others. She senses this strength on a subconscious level, and it heightens both respect and desire. A man who is mysterious is not inaccessible in a negative sense. He is intentionally measured, creating a rhythm in the relationship that keeps her emotionally engaged. Each interaction becomes meaningful, each word deliberate, and each moment of absence weighted with anticipation, allowing her attachment to grow naturally as she experiences the subtle power of your quiet confidence. Moreover, mystery ignites emotional reflection and longing. When a man allows space for uncertainty, a woman begins to notice nuances she may have overlooked in the past: the tone of his voice, the meaning behind his gestures, the energy he brings into a room. Her mind starts to interpret, analyze, and emotionally connect with the small details, creating a sense of depth that cannot be manufactured through constant transparency. Mystery turns ordinary moments into emotionally charged experiences, and the anticipation of uncovering layers of his personality keeps her engaged, intrigued, and attached. Emotional investment becomes self-sustaining because it is fueled by curiosity, imagination, and the desire to understand someone who is perceived as complex and meaningful. Finally, the power of mystery works because it transforms the dynamic of emotional pursuit. Rather than chasing validation or attention, a man who maintains an element of the unknown allows her mind and heart to do the work of attachment. Every small insight she gains about him, every discovery of a new layer, and every moment of perceived unpredictability reinforces her connection and deepens her investment. Mystery is the canvas on which her emotional energy paints desire, attachment, and longing, and it creates a rhythm of push and pull that naturally strengthens the bond without needing force, persuasion, or explanation. Self-control is one of the most underrated yet powerful aspects of attraction and emotional influence, and it signals strength in ways that words alone cannot convey. When a man demonstrates self-control in his actions, in his emotions, and in his communication, he communicates stability, confidence, and emotional intelligence. It is a quiet power that does not need to be explained, defended, or justified. In relationships, women are deeply attuned to this energy, often subconsciously perceiving the difference between a man who is reactive and impulsive and a man who is composed, measured, and intentional. Self-control creates a psychological framework in which attachment naturally strengthens because it communicates that the man is not driven by neediness, insecurity, or external validation. By exercising restraint, whether in moments of temptation, in conversations, or in decisions about when and how to engage, he signals that his presence is a choice, not a necessity, and that his emotional world is stable enough to hold space without being overwhelmed by uncertainty. When you exercise self-control, you also create a sense of anticipation and value. Every interaction becomes more meaningful because it is deliberate rather than automatic. A man who does not immediately respond to every message, who chooses when to reveal emotions, or who does not react impulsively to situations, creates a rhythm that naturally draws her attention. This rhythm communicates that he is emotionally grounded, that his time and energy are valuable, and that he does not exist merely to satisfy the expectations or whims of others. Women, in particular, are drawn to this type of emotional mastery because it reflects both reliability and unpredictability. Reliability in the sense that he is consistent in his composure, and unpredictability in the sense that he is not defined by reactive patterns. The very act of exercising self-control transforms simple actions into statements of character, creating an emotional pull that strengthens attachment because she begins to see him as someone rare, composed, and inherently valuable. Self-control also functions as a subtle mirror that amplifies her emotional investment. When a man remains composed, she is invited to reflect on her own emotions, desires, and reactions. The restraint he exhibits encourages her to consider her own attachment, her own longing, and the depth of her own feelings. Rather than feeling chased, persuaded, or overwhelmed, she experiences a natural emotional tension that activates reflection and imagination. She begins to notice what she values about him, what she misses in his absence, and how his emotional steadiness contrasts with the chaos or intensity of other interactions in her life. This dynamic strengthens her emotional dependence because she starts to measure her own feelings against his calm, collected presence, recognizing that his self-control is both an indicator of his worth and a catalyst for her attachment. Furthermore, self-control signals strength because it demonstrates the ability to lead rather than follow, to guide rather than react, and to hold personal standards without compromise. A man who maintains emotional discipline is not simply resisting impulses. He is projecting an internal architecture of power and confidence. Women instinctively respond to this because it aligns with deep psychological patterns of attraction, where emotional security, stability, and consistency are more compelling than superficial charm or constant availability. By holding space without intrusion, by choosing when to speak, act, or withdraw, a man communicates that he is emotionally sovereign, and that sovereignty becomes magnetic, inviting her to invest in a connection that is rooted in respect, admiration, and desire. Finally, the display of self-control creates a dynamic where emotional curiosity and attachment naturally flourish. Each carefully measured interaction, each intentional pause, and each demonstration of restraint conveys far more than constant engagement ever could. She begins to anticipate, reflect, and invest emotionally because she senses that she is connecting with someone who is grounded, deliberate, and capable of holding his own emotional space. Self-control becomes not just a personal discipline, but a tool of influence that strengthens attachment, ignites desire, and builds a foundation of respect because women are drawn to the quiet, unwavering strength that comes from emotional mastery. The mirror effect is one of the most subtle yet transformative dynamics in relationships, and it operates quietly, often without conscious awareness. It is the psychological phenomenon where a person begins to reflect the emotions, desires, and intentions of the one they are emotionally invested in. When a man exercises emotional control, maintains distance, or communicates selectively, he triggers a natural response in a woman's mind. She begins to mirror his emotional state, amplifying her attachment and deepening her emotional investment. This effect is not about mimicry in the obvious sense, but about the subconscious way her mind aligns with his behavior, pacing, and energy.